Hello, my name is Gabriel Grego. I'm the managing partner of Quintessential Capital Management. We're a hedge fund that specializes itself in deep due diligence and in uncovering serious corporate malfeasance, such as accounting fraud or serious crime on behalf of management. We're here today because I would like to share with you the results of our month-long due diligence about an interesting company and all the documents they uncovered. Please stop the video for a moment and read carefully the disclaimer before continuing. This is our track record. We operate probably in a different way from other funds in that we speak only when we are 100% sure of our thesis, only when we have overwhelming evidence to prove our ideas, and when we do, usually the results are plain for all to see. We put two companies completely out of business. In some cases, management have been facing criminal prosecution, and on average, we usually achieve a stock price adjustment of about 70%. Today we're speaking about a company in Italy that's called Bion. Bion is based in Bologna, and we think this may be a very, very similar case to Parmalat, which was a famous Italian scandal that happened at the beginning of the 2000s. Is this another Parmalat in Bologna? Well, we'll find out. On paper, this is a billion-dollar company, which is large by Italian standards. It's a company that operates in the bioplastics. It has sales, at least on paper, of about 50 million euros. An EBITDA of 42 million. So on paper, it looks very good. They claim to be revolutionizing plastics. What do they claim to do? They claim to have a particular technology that allows them to produce at industrial scale plastics which are generated from biological sources such as sugar and that are also biodegradable. According to them, these plastics have all sorts of applications which Bion is pursuing in automotive, beverages, electronics, food pack, pharma, and many others. So the company looks very nice with exploding revenue and profits. But what is the reality? It is the revenue and the operating income. The reality, according to us, is very difficult. We believe that this company is kind of a scam. We have incontrovertible evidence that at least most of the revenue and most of the credit of this company is fictitious. Essentially, the company is trading with itself. Assets are, for the most part, except some exceptions, almost worthless. The technology is based on old, flawed science and poor economics. There are glaring accounting irregularities. Expenses, especially capital expenses, are inflated to an incredible degree. There is evidence of suspicious transactions and very, very serious conflicts of interest. A worrying credit health, which make us think that the company soon will need to raise capital. And finally, the management team is very questionable. In practice, like many other companies that we've seen in the past, we believe that Bion looks like a scheme orchestrated by management to enrich themselves while deceiving investors. These are serious allegations. We're going to substantiate every single one of them, and by the end of the presentation, you're going to be as convinced as I am. Let's start with the science. It could be not the most important part of the presentation, but it's nice to give you an idea of what's happening with this company. We are incredibly skeptical of what's happening with the Bion science, but we are not scientists ourselves. So we went to ask two people which are expert in this. We spoke to many scientists, we spoke to many executives of similar companies, engineers, and people which understand the technology very, very well. And there has been a consensus that Bion science is, for the most part, absurd and even delusional. What's the problem? First, Bion is about this molecule called the PHA. PHA comes in many different forms. And even though from the rhetoric that you hear from Bion, it sounds as though they actually discovered this compound, or almost discovered, or rediscovered. In practice, this is a 100-year-old technology, which is very well known, that many companies have pursued and is full of problems. The biggest problem is that this technology seems to be very hard to produce in large quantities, to produce at industrial scale. It's not exactly biodegradable. It's biodegradable in some form, but not exactly. We'll see how exactly later. The concept, as we said, the concept has been tried and failed many times by companies with much larger resources than Bion. It requires a scientific talent that Bion just does not have, and it's unlikely to have any, let alone multiple commercial applications. In practice, the consensus of the scientists is clear. This is absurd and almost delusional. But let us speak with the people who told us these things directly. So don't hear from my word, hear it from the words of the experts. So Mr. Roberto Filippini Fantoni, for example, he's a very respected scientist in this field. He's a consultant, and he's also the chief editor of the AIM magazine, the Italian Association of Macromolecules. What does he say? He knows the company very well. He actually wrote an article about it a few years ago. Quote, declaring that Bion PHA could substitute a whole set of commercial polymers seems an absurd declaration. If we take into account that old polymers require increasing levels of performance that no single one can achieve, much less so an almost unknown polymer like the one from Bion. Moving on. Opinion from a leading company from bioplastics in the United States. We spoke with them. What does this person say? Based on my interaction with these characters, a scenario where biotechnology does not exist might not be far from the truth. And again, many of the management prior claims have been demonstrably exaggerated, and at the very least, they did not fully disclose important facts. Therefore, the healthy suspicion and application of a discount is entirely warranted. This is somebody from the executive team of Danimer, which is one of the leading companies in this field. They actually produce PHA as well. And quote, Danimer does not consider Bion to be a serious business competitor in PHA applications. Finally, the opinion of one of the leading scientists in polymers and bioplastics. When we asked them, this person had a very clear opinion about Bion. And quote, again, understanding and controlling properties of polymers requires enormous scientific competences. Bion competences are at absolute zero. There's an article that we find out, you can read it later. It talks about how bioplastic may be even more dangerous to the environment than conventional plastic, and how it's not exactly biodegradable for a number of reasons. So basically, this compounds, it may very well melt in water, but we don't know whether the ultimate components after the melting are natural or not. So in other words, this could be just melted liquid plastics, which then can go and pollute groundwater, rivers, and seas. So it's not absolutely sure that it's a safe technology to use. But that is only the beginning. The other big problem is we don't believe that this technology is marketable, at least not in the way that Bion seems to be pursuing it. The production costs are enormously higher than any competitors we spoke to. There is zero demand at this price, at any price that can be sold profitably for Bion. There is a history of serious failures from very well capitalized and very well companies with very good technology. In practice, people don't tend to switch away from conventional plastic unless they really have to. For example, if the government makes it illegal to use conventional plastic, nobody's going to spend 2 or 3 times more for a product that is perceived to be of lesser quality, for example. So this is a very important and interesting slide, which I would like you to pay very much attention to. So we spoke to 2 other companies, Novamont and Metabolics. They are 2, probably you can call them competitors of Bion in a way. They both produce some form of bioplastics. Metabolics no longer exist. Actually, they pretty much closed business because they could not produce profitably. Novamont is still in business, and some of you may know it because they do those recyclable plastic bags in Italy. Well, these 2 companies, Novamont recently developed a plant with a production of 80,000 tons per year, and it cost them 234 million euros. Metabolics at the time built a slightly smaller plant of 50,000, cost them 154. Bion recently, and we'll see whether this is true or not, completed a 1,000 tons, so slightly more than 1% of the capacity of Novamont, but they paid 44 million. In other words, 44,000 euros per ton of capacity versus about 3,000 of competitors. Ladies and gentlemen, these people are paying 15 times more the cost that their competitors are paying to produce the same type of plastics. So in our opinion, there are only 2 possibilities here. Either management is incredibly incompetent and is being overpaying to an incredible amount, or not all the money is going into that capex and maybe going somewhere else. And we ask ourselves, where could it be going? This is a study. We made an estimation of what are the final production costs, including operating expenses and also total expenses, if you take into account this expensive plant that they just built. Well, operating expenses are $6.50, but if you include also fixed costs, all the overheads, you go up to $12.5 per kilo of plastic. So regular plastics sells for about $2 per kilo, so 6 times less approximately. Metabolics, the company that we saw before, they went out of business having a cost base of only $5. So somehow Bion is trying to make us believe that they will survive with a cost base of $12. We believe there is no market for their products. They're very good at talking, we give them that, but unfortunately these words are usually not followed by very much. Let's see what I mean. So it's all about smoke and mirrors. They love flamboyant, enthusiastic press releases, but there is usually no follow-through whatsoever. They usually chase in these press releases whatever is sexy at the moment. Can be bone regeneration, microbeads and cosmetics, all sort of fancy things, but no project ever materialized. Over 20 partnerships announced over the last 7 years seem to remain completely inactive. No production, no sales, no operations. There is a documented history of announcing joint ventures, even though the joint venture no longer exists, in violation of confidentiality agreement. In other words, this gentleman, they go to some company and they say, hey, why don't we make a collaboration? Very rarely somebody says yes. Usually they say, no, we're not interested, or maybe they start looking into it, but then they walk out. And at least in a few cases, we know that Bion insisted, and in any case, made a press release, even though there was no collaboration, and there has been legal consequences for the company. In a very funny episode, we heard from an executive that was approached by this gentleman, and they basically came to this person and say, hey, why don't we make a joint venture? The person say, yeah, sure, show us the product. They say, well, we don't have a product, but they did bring a box of tortellini. And so at that point, the executive say, okay, well, come back to us when beside the tortellini you have a product as well. And they say, okay, fine, we will. Do you mind if meanwhile we make a press release that we're collaborating? And of course, the executives say, well, if you do that, I'm going to take you to court. So of course, they didn't. But let's see, I mean, because this is all words, let's see what they actually said. In 2015, they announced a large project for an 80 million euro plant in Brazil and a $5 million license, never developed. In 2015 in Italy, $55 million plant, never developed. In France, a $70 million plant with some kind of co-op that does sugar, never developed. Again in France in 2017, a collaboration with Kering, it's an eyeglasses frames company, never developed. We tried to reach out to Kering, they never even replied to us. No follow through, none of this partnership have any real sales, none of them have any production whatsoever. This is all smoke and mirrors. Well, what happens if you go and look industry rankings or important industry conferences for bioplastics? Usually Bion does not show up, as you can see in this slide. There is this new plant. Okay, so basically in September 2017, Bion announced they were going to build a large new plant in Castel San Pietro Terme, close to Bologna, with a budget of 50 million euros. Fast forward, the works were delayed, the company went over budget, but eventually they claimed in the fall of last year to have completed the project, but with a total cost of 50 million, so about 3 times the original amount. In January 2019, we tried to visit the facilities, and we were told, yeah, sure, you can visit. And then right at the moment of the visit, the very same morning, they basically canceled the visit because some important investor was showing up, and so they needed to show the factory to them. In any case, we went and took photographs. We came back in June 27, so less than a month ago, to check out again what's happening with that factory. There is definitely a factory, but we have doubts of whether it's completed. But don't take it from myself, take it from photographs itself. This is myself on June 27th, less than a month ago, opposite the factory in Bologna. I'm wearing a Quintessential hat, as you can see. And in the background, you see part of the factory. And very clearly, you can see a crane. You can see a lot of scaffoldings. You can see a factory in the background, too, but definitely it seems like it was under construction. We saw a lot of construction workers. We didn't see any production or product coming out. In here you can compare our visit from January 17 and our visit from June 27, 6 months later. You know, again you see the scaffoldings, again the cranes. We don't see much progress going on in these last 6 months. Finally, as I approached, we saw that there was a sign at the entrance that was saying very clearly to stop, for visitors to stop, before accessing the construction site. So they even write it on their own signs that the plant is still under construction. So as far as we can see, there is a plan for sure, but it's not complete, and they paid a fortune for it. But the most interesting part about this story, the most incredible about the story is about the accounting. I could not believe when I when I started doing due diligence on the accounting of Bion, to the extent that after finishing my due diligence, I couldn't believe my findings. I had to hire professional auditors and tax advisors in Italy to go through the accounts as well, because I wanted somebody that woke me up for something that looked completely incredible, like a dream. So what did we see? I'll start this analysis with a sentence from a former employee that when we approached him, he basically told us outright, quote, "No one today is buying plastic from Bion. License fees, 100% of current revenue, are really just studies to see if the technology works." I said, what do you mean nobody's buying? We thought this was an established company with many clients. Well, this is what we found. The methodology that we went across, say, was very, very open, transparent, and based on public filings. So what we did is we identified which were buy-on subsidiary companies and affiliates, which were the clients, and we essentially went through their financial statements of each individual subsidiary company and client to try to understand whether, by comparing them with buy-on filings, the numbers fit. And finally, as we said, we hire professionals to go through the numbers also. These are the findings summarized here. Most of the revenue is fabricated. 88% of buy-on 2018 revenue seems fabricated through related party transactions and complex joint venture accounting. In a nutshell, buy-on is selling to itself. Most or all of buy-on account receivables are likely unrecoverable. Underlying JV accounts show no business activity and virtually no sales. Physical assets are likely nearly worthless. And because of that, we believe that buy-on equity is worthless as well. So how does it work? How do they play this game? Because if you look, seemingly the financials are showing a company that is growing with a lot of sales. How does this game work exactly? It's very simple. They approach some company, some Italian company, sometimes a foreign company, and they tell them, hey, listen, let's do some kind of joint venture. Let's pick some application for plastic, can be tables, can be furniture, can be anything. We're going to, buy-on are going to take all the expenses. We're going to research it. If we find anything that works, we'll split the profit of 50-50. Immediately after, buy-on creates a shell company, an empty box basically, and makes a very, very enthusiastic press release, promising large investments and large amounts of sales. This obviously has the effect of boosting the share price. And almost immediately afterwards, what does buy-on do? They sell its own licensed technology to this shell company. In other words, they sell millions and millions of dollars of technology at completely arbitrary prices, essentially to itself, to a company, to a shell company that is empty inside, that has no operation, that has no sales, that has no capacity to pay. buy-on books the sale immediately, but of course, the empty box cannot pay buy-on back because it doesn't have any assets. And so this stays pretty much almost forever as an account receivable. So the buy-on never gets a cash in from these sales. So again, this debt is never repaid by the JV. The JV never built any factory, does not produce or sell any product whatsoever. And this is not for months. In some cases, we found JVs which have been opened in 2015, which as of today don't have any sales and have never paid anything. In the rare cases that buy-on does get some money back, how does it get it? It simply takes its own cash which has been taken either by banks or by selling its own share to shareholders, capitalizes or puts some money inside the empty box, and then uses the empty box, that money in the empty box, which it just put in there, to pay itself back. So nothing ever comes out, no production, no external sales whatsoever. In other words, sales are fictitious, circular, and to itself. In this slide, you can see very clearly, you see at the size and at the bottom, those are one by one all of buy-on subsidiaries. If you have time, you can go through the accounts at the company register. We will make available some of these accounts in the later days and put them on our website. And keep in mind that these account receivables account for almost $59 million in 2018, which is the largest part of buy-on assets. As I said before, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw those numbers, and I hired tax advisors and auditors to go through the accounts. And unfortunately, all of my suspicions and insights were confirmed. For example, Mr. Maurizio Shalom helped us out, and he told us very clearly, in a formal opinion, which will be made available on our website, there are critical flaws in buy-on accounting. What are these critical flaws? Well, pretty much what we told before. Buy-on revenue mostly originates from its own controlled or affiliated companies. Most of these sales had not been collected. Collections paid by the JV occasionally are mostly from funds originating from buy-on itself. Buy-on has at least $33 million of outstanding credit to its JVs where collectability is in doubt, considering that the JVs have virtually no sales and seemingly no infrastructure or operations. Tangible assets, about $53 million, should have undergone an impairment test after cost doubled. In other words, cost doubled or even tripled from the budget, and as we showed you before, there is no way that with those costs they can do any profitable production, therefore the asset should have been written off. It has not been. So what's happening now? The true picture is very worrying because we're a company where sales are in doubt, where credit are in doubt, so we really worry about buy-on credit health. Again, on paper, everything is growing. In reality, though, if you see the free cash flows which are entering the company, they're always negative and increasingly negative. So every year, Bion does not have any cash in and only loses cash, time by time. Why is that? Well, because sales are fictitious, so it's only receivable, there's never cash coming in. And there are these enormous capital expenses, which are never recovered. You see that while free cash flows are deteriorating year after year, liabilities are increasing very scaringly fast. So debt, you can see in the graph on the left, and also account payables are at very worrying proportions. And they're backed by what? By non-existing cash flow, as we saw, and by very, very problematic assets. What are the assets in Bion balance sheet? A factory, which costs 3 times the amount that it should have cost, where you had a very, very clear opinion from an external professional that says that should be written off, so it's worth 0. You have account receivables, which is basically just money that Bion owes to itself, so it's completely unrecoverable. You have a little bit of technology, a tiny bit, that a lot of scientists told us that is probably worthless. And then the company does have about 22 million euro of bonds and cash, which it can use to stay afloat for a little while. But the long-term picture is very worrying, and Bion will be probably forced to go back to the financial markets and ask for money, which after this presentation is going to find very, very hard to do. We are worried that there may have been some perverse incentives. We noticed some very funny transaction happening in the months or years immediately before Bion announces some collaborations. What am I talking about? Well, we're worrying that they may be providing some kind of incentive to the individuals that control these JVs in order to agree to a collaboration. As we said before, there's large payments or large contracts awarded to individuals which have to do later with the JV. There have been a very, very worrying amount of warrants which have been given away at the steal price, basically from Bion over the years. And we believe that the true meaning of this transaction is very sinister and problematic. But let's see this funny transaction. In December 15, 2017, the Luti family, which controls an Italian company called Cartel, has acquired 2% of the shares of Bion. This was a press release, clear for everybody to see. It's about 400,000 shares at 26.5 euro per share on the 15th of December. Well, we went to see what was the share price on the 15th of December. It was not 26, it was actually 29 euros per share. In other words, that 2% stake was acquired with a total discount of approximately 1 million euro. The way it looks to us is that this family received 1 million euro for free from Bion. We wonder why this transaction, why is it that these people are getting these shares at such a discount? Well, what happened exactly 1 year later? Bion and Cartel, the same company that did that, announced this collaboration together to produce bioplastic furniture. Meanwhile, that original investment went up again, and the family seems to have pocketed 11 million euro. Something very similar happened with this company called Hera, which on January 2018, Bion basically gives them a very large contract for about 3 million euros to build an electricity generation plant in order to supply probably the plant that we saw before. 3 million euro lucrative contract. 6 months later, guess what? Bion and Hera, the same company you just saw, they come and they do a joint venture for bioplastics again. This is all very suspicious. And then there is this very curious, almost unbelievable case of this Banca Finnat. Who is Banca Finnat? Banca Finnat is the only sell-side research bank that covers Bion stock. So if any investor wants to read something about Bion, which has not been written by Bion, but has been written by a third party, they have to read the reports of Banca Finnat, which almost invariably tend to be bullish, always with a very aggressive buy and target price. So these reports strike to us as very optimistic. In 2018, so recently, Bion announced 2 new joint ventures, 2 new companies for bioplastics, Life and Aldea. And this is a bit of an anomaly, because usually when Bion announces this kind of JVs, they like very much to boast about the name and the identity of the counterparty that did the joint venture with them. They did that in the 20-plus press releases that we saw. In this case, for some reason, they don't disclose who is the counterparty. They just say that it's an important financial partner. And as you see, it also shows up in Banca Finnat's own analyst report. They talk about the transaction, 10% of which is with an undisclosed financial partner. We say, who is this partner? How come they never say who it is? So we went to check on the company register, and sure enough, the partner is Banca Finnat itself. Banca Finnat was awarded, one way or another, 10% of each one of those 2 JVs of Bion. and something that is almost hard to believe. Why is this important? Well, number one, because there is a very large conflict of interest, because Bankafin that is covering the stock is a special advisor for Bion, and therefore should be objective. They should not be owning part of the business. Number two, because exactly those two companies, Life and Aldea, are responsible for as much as 36% of Bion revenue in 2018, and as much as 46% of receivables. They both originate from those two companies. Just like most of the other JVs, neither of that JV has any sales, production, operations, or employees. Then, we said it before, there have been these warrants that were given away over the years from 2015 to 2017. Something like 21 million euros of warrants were given to 21 unknown investors. And they were given at 52% below market price. In other words, these people cashed out on very large amounts of money given from Bion founders. And when we asked Bion, who are these people, they never said it. So we don't know who these people are, but we suspect that these people may be somehow related to the counterparty of the JVs to convince them to come into business with Bion and its shell game. Another interesting transaction is a 1 million warrants loan in 2014 that was given again to an undisclosed family office or financial investor acting as a private equity office. We don't know who it is. We do notice that Bankafina has its own family office, so perhaps it is, perhaps it is not. In any case, whoever was the beneficiary of that transaction, they made 7 million euro profit. In conclusion, I think we made a very strong case that Bion appears to be a scheme to enrich insiders at the expense of ordinary shareholders through the shell game, self-dealing, circular sales, and non-existing credits. The company is based on flawed science, lack of production, fictitious sales, questionable accounting, and weak credit health. This is very serious, and because of that, Quintessential has informed already all the authorities in Italy which are competent in this case. What's going to happen? In our opinion, and if history is any guide, Bion stock is now due for a collapse, and is probably eventually going to be delisted. There are going to be regulatory, civil, and possibly even criminal charges pending against the company. In other words, Bion will cease to exist as a commercial entity. But this is only the beginning. We're not done. It was impossible to share with you the sheer mole of documents that we collected on this case. So we're going to be posting in the coming few days on Twitter and on our website a lot of new documents. They're going to convince you probably even more of what we just said, the evidence, the financial statement of the subsidiaries, reports. So please follow us on Twitter and stay updated by checking out our website. Thank you very much.